Welcome everybody to the Conscious Grief Series 2. Today I am joined by dear friend Chanel Brenner. Chanel is an author of 2 books now. Her first book, Vanilla Milk, is a memoir told in poems, and her most recent book is called Smile or Else, which I'm hoping we're going to hear from today. So welcome, Chanel.
Thank you so much for having me, Tara. I'm honored to be a part of this series.
Well, I'm really delighted to have you here and for you to share about your grief. You come to grief as a bereaved parent. So perhaps you would like to, first of all, share about dear Riley and how he passed, if that would be okay.
Yeah, so my older son, Riley, he was a very sweet and creative and joyful boy, and he loved Christmas. He loved celebrating all holidays. He was always asking me, like, what's next, after every holiday. And he loved creating like Arrowhead water bottle robots. He would make out of the big 5-gallon water bottles that he would use like random things from around the house, like some like frozen waffle boxes and his dad's clothes, and he'd dress them. So he was always creating things. And he actually wrote a story that I was wanting to share with you that was about Christmas. And he wrote it when he was 5 years old. And we actually put it in a Christmas card a couple of years after he died. And it's called Merry, Merry Christmas, a story by Riley Winter, written in 2010. When the children are sleeping, Santa Claus wraps gifts all night. Every year, Santa gives presents to all the little kids who are dreaming. The bad ones don't get presents because they are naughty. Only the good children who are nice every year. These are cakes. They are Christmas feast of cakes. Sail the 7 seas away. My boat is made for Christmas Day. The flowers on Christmas Day are special. They don't grow on Thanksgiving or Halloween. The house of Christmas Eve will not disappear. The rainbow of Christmas Eve will not disappear. The Christmas boy will not disappear. The Christmas boy is special at all times. The Christmas icicle will not disappear. The end. So so I just that actually part of that I used as the original title of my first book, Vanilla Milk, which was going to be originally The Christmas Boy Will Not Disappear. And that story that he'd written had fallen off the bookshelf when I was trying to figure out a name. So Riley, that he wrote that when he was 5. He died when he was 6.5 from a brain hemorrhage. And it was caused by a birth defect, a very rare birth defect that we didn't know he had. He had, it's called an arteriovenous malformation, also known as an AVM. And when he was 5 years old, before he wrote that story, he had his first bleed, and he ended up in the UCLA pediatric intensive care unit for about 7 nights. And we didn't know if he was going to make it. And he ended up surviving without any deficits, and went on to live, another 1.5 years. And and then about 1.5 years later is when he had a massive bleed, and that's the one that took his life. We actually donated his organs to, his heart went to a little girl, like a 5-year-old girl. His kidneys went to teenagers, and his liver went to a little boy. And last we heard, because we do check in, last we heard they were all still thriving.
Oh, wow. I didn't know about that.
Yeah. It was, I remember standing in the hospital with Lee when we were kind of in the midst of like, what's going to happen? Is he going to live? It's not looking like he is. And I remember he came up to me and just looked at me and said, do you want to donate his organs? And I was like, it was like a moment, I'm just like, yes. I'm like, I want to give hope to other parents that can actually have some hope. And it just felt like, I just knew that was what I wanted to do. Yeah.
Wow, that's really amazing, Chanel. And I've heard some stories about, really profound stories about, sorry, I've got something in my throat.
It happens.
Yeah, if you keep in touch with those children to see if there's any memories that they may have in the future. Yeah, because I have heard things like that. That was a very profound decision that you made in an incredibly stressful moment, that you had that sort of clarity. Did that sort of clarity stay with you during your grief around things?
Yeah, I guess, it's interesting that you bring that up, because that is kind of one of the moments where I did have that kind of clarity. And I had a different kind of clarity after Riley died. Yeah. And it was kind of the same thing that, I heard a voice in my head the night he died. I was in my kitchen and, just like kind of feeling crazy. And then I had, like just wanting to scream, pull my hair out, didn't know what to do. What was I going to do? And I had this clear voice in my head that said, write. And so I sat down at the computer and wrote a poem, and it just continued. That's what, poetry was my lifeline.
Yeah, that's when you were sharing about Riley making the robots and using, things from the kitchen to be creative. I thought, oh, that's interesting, because that's obviously part of you and how you've used your creativity. I remember when we did the other interview, something that really stuck with me that you said was, creativity brings hope. And that was like so profound. And so, yeah, tell us more. So you just started writing poems. Was that something that came out of nowhere, or something you had done before?
Well, when Riley died, I was in writing workshops here in Los Angeles with Jack Grapes. And I had only written a few poems, and I had been learning his method writing, and but doing more prose writing. Really had never really considered that I would write poetry, so it was surprising. And yeah, as far as like what I found through the writing is that, it gives me an opportunity to imagine him still alive, or, envision him in a different world, or, and also for like making sense of the new lens I have of, through his death, so that like when things happen, with his brother, or, I can sit and write about it and kind of make sense of it, of the new world that I'm living in after his death. And and I think it creates hope, because I'm able to, I send it out for publication. I'm able to share it and connect. And I think one of the biggest things after, a loss is to be able to connect with others that have gone through something similar. And I think I really craved that and seeked out a community and people that have been through the same thing as me. Yeah, I felt really isolated.
I'm sure. So you through your writing, you sort of found a grief community, would you say?
Yeah. I made, my first friend that had also lost a child was in my writing workshop that I was in, and she, befriended me. We went out to lunch. She had lost an older son, and she is a dear friend to me to this day, and like helped me in so many ways to go get through, those early stages, because she had been there. She was already 4 years into the loss of her son.
Okay.
So she had insight into what, how it changed and what I was in, and, that kind of thing. So it was helpful.
So in your grief journey, for want of a better word, how would you sort of describe it? Because obviously grief is not something that we ever get over. It ebbs and flows, it changes, and with the death of a child, which is, without wanting to go into grief hierarchies, like so painful, for people who are in this position themselves, like how would you say that the intensity, for example, of your grief changed over time?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's, for me, it's been 10 years now, and it's hard to believe when I say that, because it doesn't feel like 10 years. I mean, it feels like it was a long time ago, but then on the other hand, sometimes it just feels like it just happened, which is always, time is such a surreal thing when you go through loss like this, and I've seen kind of some changes, and for me, I kind of feel the best metaphor that's worked for me to understand it is thinking of it as like my grief as like an infant, like having a baby, and the stages you go through with, raising a child. Like, Desmond was a toddler at one point, now he's 13, and like how that the intensity changes of that, and how there's different stages. I feel like that's similar to with grief. And I actually wrote a poem called Raising Grief that for me kind of, that made sense of that, like how the intensity changes. So if you would like, I could read it.
I would love that. Thank you.
Raising Grief. Morning was born, colicky, wet-eyed, trying to console her, sleep deprived. I pushed her in a stroller, tried every octave. Those first years bled nights, falling asleep with her in my arms, breathing in unison, protecting the fontanelle on her fragile head. Now I know to feed her sweet bread and help her self-soothe when she seethes. Before she runs off to climb a tree, she nuzzles me on a park bench, swinging her legs like a 4-year-old.
I remember you telling me once that you didn't feel like you were a crier. And I thought that was really an interesting thing to share about for people who may be thinking like, am I normal, for example, to not be like that? Would you be open to sharing a little bit more about your sort of emotional range and your ways of expressing yourself, I guess?
Yeah, I think I've always been more of a mad crier. Like if I get really angry, I cry. And, there was something about crying too after, and this just came to me, that there was something about crying after Riley died that felt very much like I was in a movie, like overly dramatic. Like you know what I mean? And I just, yeah. And I never really felt, I think there was also this fear of like, first of all, that I would start crying and never stop.
Yeah.
And how much do I let in of that at a time? And, I've always hated the way crying makes me feel afterwards. I don't like having the congestion. I don't like the red eyes, and I feel exhausted. Like I actually feel like it's like indulgent in negativity. Like I actually don't feel better. I almost feel like it's kind of similar to like sitting complaining in a journal, like, or diary, like all negative stuff. Like it just and so I just, so writing, I have that voice in my head. And so writing is different to me because it does make me face the loss. Like I'm forced to be in it.
Yeah.
But I'm in it in a way where I have, I think, more control and in a more positive way. Cause I'm, I'm creating, and yeah. And I can create a world where he's up climbing a tree still, or about joyful moments, and the sad moments. And I feel the difference between how I feel after I cry and how I feel after I write a poem. It tells me that that's what I need to do from my journey. that crying is not, and that doesn't mean crying is not other people, that it could be totally different. So I think it's listening to your own intuition and knowing what's right for you and not listening to other views out there necessarily. It's good to seek out expert advice, and go to therapists and all of that, but ultimately not everything they're going to tell you to do is going to, feel right to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's such good advice, because people around you may sort of think, oh, she's not actively grieving if, she's not crying, or sort of have these kind of judgments about that. Mm-hmm. So I love what you're saying, that that's what feels right for you, and that you weren't, worried, for example, that you weren't doing grief right, and that it's such a unique process. And maybe sometimes we don't grieve for many, many years, or, we find our own way of processing. And I think that your poetry is like so honest and raw, and there are, poems in there that really, well, it's all expressing your grief, but it's also like an active way of mourning and mm-hmm. remembering, and like you say, keeping that this is how it feels for me, like keeping that connection with Riley, but then it's also connecting you to other people as well in your work. And what about the poem Rite Aid? Can you tell everybody about that?
Yeah, that's one of my few anger poems that was about, going back to those first places again that I had, that I went to with Riley a lot, and then had to go back to. And, I actually had help of a hypnotherapist with that, and that she worked with me on going back to places for the first time. Like, and that was my first experience after Riley died of ever going to a hypnotherapist. But she was someone who had also gone through a tragic loss. She had lost her husband on his birthday when she had 3 young kids in a tragic car accident. And it, motivated her to become a hypnotherapist. So she was one of the components that really helped me too, in addition to writing. And she actually hypnotized me to go back to these places and feel less pain, basically, was the idea, was to help soften that. But so going back into Rite Aid for the first time, which Riley always loved, the poem came out of just the anger of the grief that I felt when I was there, of buying a toy and that kind of thing for Riley. So I named the poem Fucking Rite Aid. Which I actually do get feedback from a lot of people actually that have gone through loss too, that they want more of my angry poems.
Yeah, absolutely. Because and also it's so interesting, the moments of being in a supermarket buying food, these very everyday situations which are so triggering, and we find ourselves in, and not buying those favorite foods, like vanilla.
Yeah, that big like hole of like, where you just, of things that you stop doing when you lose that person,
Yeah.
And I think that's part of for me, the challenge with such a big loss is what do you do with that hole that's always there, And that is one thing, I think, no matter, as the intensity shifts and things change, that it's still there, and I think that's why, for me it's writing, but for some people it's doing other things to, honor the loss, creating a foundation, that kind of thing, things that they wouldn't have done if they hadn't experienced the loss,
Yeah, and again, using as, having a sort of creative outlet for somehow, like my sisters and I, for example, when our mum first died, we did set up a charity in her name and organized fundraising events and things like that, which, you know, it's nearly 20 years ago now, so we haven't done anything, but that really definitely was a way to sort of honor her memory. So you think of that. But I was also, you know, you're talking about your anger, and again, like a lot of people have a difficult time embracing anger, should we say, or even feeling like anger is an okay emotion to have, or some people feel like they don't get angry. But actually, when you start talking about triggering things that people say to us in grief, that's always a really great way to start accessing our anger when we're grieving. Was there any insensitive things that people said to you that you'd be willing to share in this interview?
Yeah, you know, there were a lot of them through the years. I mean, it actually kind of crazy, just the things that people say that are thoughtless, but they don't even like, I felt like almost always there's no intention there, you know. One thing someone said to me was actually in my writing workshop, and after I had read a piece about Riley, and I thought, they said, "Oh, Chanel, can I ask you something?" And I thought it was going to be something about my writing piece, and she said, "How do you get pedicures and put on makeup in the morning? If it was me, I wouldn't even be able to get out of bed." And I'm just, how do you even respond to that, right? And I'm just like, what? So that was one. Another one was, well, you know, you still have, be grateful, you still have, you know, another son and a husband, you know. Another one was, you're lucky you only have one kid. And the one that I got a lot, which really doesn't sound bad or doesn't sound like it's insensitive, and it's, you know, was that you're so brave. I heard that all the time, you're so brave. And I would think, I don't feel brave. And I think Riley was the brave one for what he went through, not me. I'm just his mother. I'm not, you know, so that one just like, I would always I felt like almost like a slap in the face. I would just be kind of stunned by it. Yeah.
And generally speaking, how did you respond to those comments?
I think usually with just nothing.
Right.
I think I just kind of froze.
Yeah.
You know, you just kind of walk away from it, right? I mean, I don't feel like I don't think I ever responded or can remember a single response to that. Yeah. That I actually said out loud, even that part about that I don't feel brave. I don't think I ever, you know.
Yeah, I know. I think that's a really, like you say, people are always being well-meaning when they're saying these things, but like when they say, "Oh, you're so strong," or "You're so brave," it's kind of like they're saying it thinking it's like a compliment, but it's just very difficult to say the right thing as well. And I wonder whether, you know, do you have any thoughts on what was a helpful thing to say, or the people that you found the easiest, you know, to be around, for example?
For me, I mean, I have one friend who would a lot of times just reach out and say, "I'm thinking about you and Riley." And I think that was the to this day, she still will do that, like on, you know, certain days, you know, like the anniversary of his death, or, you know, a certain holiday, just, you know, and I think just that I'm thinking of you, or, you know, and simple things, even just like, "I'm sorry for your loss," or, you know, mentioning his name, not, you know, avoiding it. I think for me, those were the most helpful.
Yeah, because like you say, I think a lot of people then feel afraid to say the wrong thing, so then they just don't say anything at all.
And I still struggle with that. I don't know about you and other people, but after going through such a loss, you would think it would be easy to know what to do in that situation, but I struggle with it. I'll sit there, and think, like, what do they want to hear? They may not want to hear what I want to hear. And I kind of overthink it, but that you're right, though. What you don't want to do is freeze up and do nothing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I think it's hard, right?
I mean, I was talking in another interview with somebody else who'd lost her parents young, and I used to sometimes just lie, if somebody said, oh, what does your dad do, or instead of turn around and say, oh, my dad's dead, because that would just be like, well, where do we go from there? and then you start consoling the other person, or I'm sure that's that.
I learned, I mean, to this now, like Desmond and I were just sitting, opening an account for him at Wells Fargo, and the nice lady, behind the desk was just like, oh, do you have any other kids? And then asked me again, do you have accidentally? Oh, so wait, so you don't have any other kids? And I was like, no. And Desmond, I mean, we've gone through it together through the years with other, his friends' parents and friends. And we've both kind of learned, like, no, we don't want to go there right now. It's not really, you know what I mean? Because it is like then it's the whole experience becomes about that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
exactly. We sort of pick and choose our moments for when we have either the energy or we feel like we want to invest that information with somebody. And
that's like, I think that never changes. Like, I mean, you learn how to manage that a little better, but it's still inside. I always just say, yes, Riley, I know, I don't have to say it out loud, because in the beginning, it felt like I can't like just ignore my other child and say I only have, one kid. But I think that over time, you just, realize you can acknowledge in, yourself and not necessarily share with everyone or in, certain situations. Yeah.
But on that subject, I mean, obviously through your writing, as I said before, you're actively remembering him and mourning him through your poetry. But how about keeping his memory and the relationship continuing at the moment? And, do you have rituals? I mean, you said he really loves the holidays. Like, how is that for your family?
Yeah, Desmond loves the holidays too. I think he took on the extra, Riley love of Christmas, because he's like way into it. Every year we send out a Christmas card, and we always put in loving memory of Riley. Always have him on the card. In the beginning it was probably more, but we always do something. And, I kind of feel like, that's an important ritual. So I'm always very like, what pictures are we going to put on the card? I get, really creative about that. And, we have, every year for the anniversary of his death, we always go to somewhere new, basically, like just go on a trip somewhere new. So, and then we actually write in postcards to Riley. Like, we sit around, we have some other family members who come with us. And so that's a ritual we started probably 4 years ago, like halfway into it. Like, everywhere we go, let's send Riley a postcard. So we've been saving those. So it's been nice.
That's so lovely. And didn't you say you were also buying him cakes? So you were still...
Yeah. We do that for his birthday every year from Angel Maid Bakery. And for years they had Spider-Man on them. Spider-Man's his favorite. So we do that sometimes still. And there was always the question of what to put on the cake, happy birthday, Riley, or just heart. So we've gone all through the years, we've just switched it up every year,
It sounds like you have a very healthy dynamic within your family to talk about Riley. Did that happen immediately? Was it something that you got some advice from a professional around? Like, how does Desmond cope with it?
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like, we did get some advice from the hypnotherapist that we that my husband saw her too. And she was really helpful in how to navigate, my grief experience and journey versus my husband's, because, she explained that and helped me realize too, that we were going to be on different healing journeys, not necessarily heal at the same pace. And that there's some days when you're having, like, especially in the beginning when it was really intense, where you'd be having a day where maybe you're not thinking about it, you're not totally in the grief, and then the other person comes up and says, hey, did you look at this picture of Riley, or I just found this, and you kind of like throw them off, like, so we learned to respect that. So it's like, we would be like, are you having a good day, should I bring this up to you? And then Lee would just say, no, not today, and it's like, okay. So navigating that, she was very helpful with Desmond. I feel like because he was, 1 year old when Riley died, that or actually he was 2, he was 1 when he first had Riley, his first bleed. So he was just 2. He experienced it, and it was such an unusual way. Like, one time I found him just laying in his crib, like putting, like, he had diapers all over him, like these, like, like the disposable diapers. Riley used to joke around and wear them as a hat and do funny things with them. So I found Desmond just laying there with like one of those hats on and diapers on him. And he just looked at me and he said, I'm so sad about Riley. And I was just like, wow, this is like a almost 3-year-old or something, like, and he would talk about playing chess with his brother. He'd sit there and pretend that he was playing chess with him, or playing lightsabers, or tell me, oh, Riley's here, I just saw Riley. So there was a very imaginative, state he was in. And I think all I felt like I had to do was just let it happen.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I'd never heard you speak about that before. That's so interesting. Yeah.
I haven't. I don't think I really have. So thank you for bringing that out, because it made me remember some things. Yeah.
Yeah. And such a good point about your process, respecting with your partner, your husband, Lee, that you're going to be in different places at different times with your grief, and that it's going to be your own unique journey. And yeah, that must have been very helpful to have had a third party to sort of just advise you on that.
Yeah. I think that it's important to find somebody that, has been through what you've been, like something similar, a loss, and has, that experience. Because I think you need that. I think that I needed, I don't know, I might have been able to get it from another source, and so, but I definitely really helped.
So my final question, Chanel, I like to ask people what they think, what's your interpretation of conscious grief?
Okay. I think for me, it's about listening to your intuition and doing what you feel is right for your grief journey. I think I mentioned this earlier, that I think that if, it's important to, or not important to, but, it's good to seek out expert advice and help, but ultimately you're an expert in your own grief.
Yes.
And I think that you have to listen to your intuition on that. And an example of that for me was, the first therapist we saw after Riley died, when I brought up the subject of having another baby, she said, it's too soon. You can't even think about that now. And I was just like, wait, what? I can't even, like, I am thinking about it, and I'm 41. So, at the time, and I'm like, so that was that. And then, and that was something that I knew I needed to do for myself, for my family, was to try to have another baby. And, and it was an important part of the grieving process for me. to do that, to create hope. Once again, that's something for me that was creating hope.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, we never did end up being able to have another child, but I am grateful that I think I would have regretted it terribly if I had just listened to that and thought like, that's not, you know, you can't just have another baby right after you lost a child. And I listened to that advice. I think I would have been devastated. And I think that, I think sometimes too, it's just about taking the steps to create hope, you know, and that's the thing. It ultimately for me, I was ready to let go of that. And it wasn't, you know, but that was an important part of the journey as far as that, even though it didn't end up with the child, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So I think, yeah, I think just being your own advocate in your grief and your experience is conscious grieving.
Yeah, I absolutely love that interpretation of it, actually. And I haven't heard somebody, you know, coin it like that. So I think it's so important. And also important really for every aspect of our lives, isn't it? Like so many people that we can reach out to who are experts, and actually, like you say, we are the experts of our own life. And so we should always have a curiosity around what anyone tells us, right? You know? Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Right. And stay open.
Stay open. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's really like, I think that's really key, is staying open to other ideas and experiences after a loss. Being open to new things.
I was just thinking, actually, one last thing is you mentioned the hypnotherapy. Was there any other modalities that you found of healings, for example? Did you do any other things?
Yeah, I mean, lately I have, like in the last few years, I started to realize how much the effect of grief on my body and how I felt. And I started strength training, which I think what really was good for me. And then also doing breath work, because I realized that, you know, I was holding my breath, and I didn't realize that you hold grief in your lungs, you know, and I just would, you know, I went to a doctor, actually. I went and got chest x-ray at one point. I was like, why am I not breathing? Like, why can I not breathe? And ultimately it was just me tightening, you know, and not breathing. And so that's been really helpful. And also doing some energy healing, some energy work. And I've gotten into like stones, like this one's a moonstone. And I do feel like there's something to, you know, have like the power of the stones with your energy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So being open to things that I wouldn't have necessarily been open to before Riley died. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing those. And it's very interesting, like you said, about the breath and how grief really does get held in our lungs, and we may not be aware of how much grief affects our body. So
yeah I'm still trying to figure that out. It's a practice, right? Yeah.
Is there anything else that you'd like to share before we wrap up today?
No, I think we covered a lot. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
You're welcome.
I really appreciate you being here, and it's lovely to speak about Riley and honor him in this conversation. So
yeah, I feel like it really, especially this time of year, right before the holidays, it felt really good to honor him and read his story. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can put a link at the bottom of this to your website, and then people can look at your you can buy your books from your website, can't you? We can.
Yeah, there's a link to the press, I believe. And then there's and then Amazon, but there's a link on there. Yeah, my website. Yeah.
Well, thank you everybody who's been listening. And again, thank you to you, Chanel.